Ramaka, Lokati, Sati, Saham, Sati, Satan, Jali, Anade, Waram, Ayachata, Satita, Sata, Kara, Shaka, Satita, Sesesu, Tamam, Nilkam, Simbam, Pajam.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. This afternoon I want to talk about Sankharas, what they are, what difficulties they can cause, and how we can deal with them skillfully. The word Sankara, it comes from the root, same root as karoti. Karoti means to make or do. Sankharas are, broadly speaking, constructed things, things that are built or fabricated. And the use in the Pali Canon, depending on context, it has three possible related meanings. We could say they're, in a sense, nested meanings. The broadest meaning of Sankara is all conditioned things. So all objects in samsaric existence, whether bodies or mind, internal or external, the only Dhamma that is not a Sankara is Nibbana. So we have, for example, the formula that comes up. I think it's in the Angudara, and it's embedded in one of the chants in the chanting book. Is all Sankharas are suffering, all Sankharas are impermanent, and all Dhammas are empty or not self. Because Nibbana is also empty, but the other two characteristics don't apply to it. So Dhamma is a broader meaning than Sankhara. All Sankharas are Dhammas, but not all Dhammas are Sankharas. Nibbana is a Dhamma, and everything else is Sankhara. So that's the broadest possible construction. It has then a narrower meaning in the list of the five aggregates. One of them is Sankara, and that's usually translated as mental formations. And that's what I want to primarily focus on. Sankharas are mental formations, all the things constructed by the mind. And here we have another, a narrowing of categories. In the Abhidhamma, the primary classification of objects of the mind is Chitta versus Chaitasika. Chaitasika are all the objects of the mind, or Sankharas in a broad sense, which includes perceptions and feelings as well as mental formations. But in the five aggregates, perceptions and feelings are classified separately, and Sankharas just refers to formations of the mind. This is thought in the broadest sense, not just verbal or cognitive thought, but imaginings and complex emotions that are built on a base of Vedana. They include also Sankara on top of that. So Sankharas are a very broad category of mental activity. And I'll just mention the narrowest use of the word Sankharas in the dependent origination. The second step of the dependent origination, from ignorance arises Sankharas, and these are referring specifically to those mental formations that are kama making, volitional formations. So a particular subgroup of Sankharas, of mental formations. karmically active formations are what's implied in the form of the dependent origination. Sankharas as mental formations are one of the principal culprits in causing sentient beings to suffer. People suffer a great deal just because of their own mental constructions. This is a very large part of human suffering. Well, there's suffering due to bodily failure or pain from injury or illness, and there's suffering in the feeling tone, unhappy feelings, grief and despair and so on. But there's also a large category of suffering that beings endure entirely due to mental formations, to their own mental constructions, their thoughts and their beliefs and their assumptions causes them to suffer. We can see in our own lives and in the lives of people we know, we see many, many examples of this. It's extremely common. And there are even whole categories of mental illness that are, we would say, dysfunctions of the mental formations, like obsessive compulsive disorder. And it's also a huge component in depression, that the mental formations are become burdensome. Anxiety disorders. The mental formations become burdensome, troublesome, and plague the person. The underlying reason is that the person who suffers because of their mental formations is holding them in the wrong way, giving them regard as something important and substantial and real, when they're entirely empty shadow plays of the mind. They have no substance, no intrinsic reality. You might think that, well, if I'm suffering from anxiety about some real situation in the world, there's some reality to it. But that remains still an illusion, because first of all, the mental formation is not the external reality. It's only a distant shadow of it. And the whole concept of an external reality is extremely problematic and dubious to begin with. To pin down what is actually real, what is true, is not a simple or easy thing. But our mental constructions and fabrications are not real in any sort of ontological sense, no sort of metaphysical sense. They're just our own constructions. And they're impermanent in that they come and go. They're constantly shifting and changing. And this itself can be perceived as a type of suffering. The sheer busyness of the mind can feel burdensome. This is something very often encountered by novice meditators. When they begin to look at their own mind, they see how out of control and how busy it is, and how random various kinds of thoughts and images are passing through the mind, and it's troublesome. And this is something I've seen a few times, that somebody does their first serious meditation retreat, and in about the third or fourth day they come and tell me they think they're going crazy. And ask them, well, why do you think you're going crazy? And so, well, my mind is all over the place. It's thinking this, thinking that. It won't quiet down. One woman had a really good analogy. She says it's like there was half a dozen radios scattered around in the cabin, and they're all tuned to different stations, and they're coming in and out, and there's static in some, and some there's music, and some there's talk shows, and they're coming in and out all the time. And I tell them, no, you're not going crazy. You're just seeing your mind for the first time. Your mind's been doing that since you were born. You're seeing it clearly now. So it seems really disturbing. But now that you're seeing it clearly, it'll quiet down, and it does. So that's what we're doing with the meditation is we're first of all making the processes of the mind, the thinking and the emoting and remembering and all the rest of it, we're making them conscious. We're bringing them into the light of day. And doing so, if it's done correctly, then the mind will become quieter. The processes will begin to settle. And what do I mean by doing it properly? This is really key, is being able to see the sankharas objectively and not to identify with them, not to see them as me or mine, and not to grant them significance. Something I often tell people is don't take your mind state so seriously. You know? If you are able to observe them clearly with the quiet, equanimous mind centered in the chitta, and just watch the formations come and go, and neither become identified or attached, nor become frightened or upset by them. This is just what the mind does. It just makes these stories and these formations, and it plays out this drama, and it's trying to get my attention with these tricks. Just settle back into the knowing mind and let it unravel. It'll wind itself down if you're not feeding it. Whenever you're caught in any kind of negative mental state, it exists because you're feeding it energy. You're taking some interest in it in the wrong way. And that includes a negative interest of being upset by it or afraid of it. If you're just observing it from an unmoved point of observation, from the clear center in the chitta, then the formations settle out. They become more quiescent. And then we can begin to understand them, not looking at the content so much as the process. And we can see that they're conditionally arisen. They arise from causes and effects, not otherwise. They're not independent. They arise from causes. So one exercise that can be useful if you are trying to attend to something and you find your mind has wandered off and you're thinking about something completely random other than what you should be attending to, sometimes it's useful to try and trace back your thought process step by step and see where you jumped off the rails. And you can see that it is a process. Everything is linked. There's a cause and effect chain, even though it may seem odd to examine the beginning point and the end point. They don't seem connected. There are intermediate steps that join them. Very often the mind will run off into sankharas for various reasons. One is that there's something more important that you should be looking at, but you're trying to avoid it. So the mind will jump off into some sideways track, and oh, this is kind of neat over here. Let's play with this for a bit. I don't want to deal with my actual issue. I want to play with this formations over here. Another way it happens is if the attention is lagging with where it should be. An external stimulus like a sound or a smell can trigger it. You can hear a door slam or a fly buzz or something, and the mind attends to that and then jumps to something else and a chain from that. You can see often that's the case. But this exercise of tracing back your thoughts can be quite illuminating and helpful, helping to get control of the thought process. Another thing to observe is that we're not ever really in control of the thought process completely. Only an arahant, a fully enlightened being, is said to be the master of their own mind. And we can have degrees of discipline and control over the mind, but it's not really accessible to be completely in control. This is one of the reasons we know that the thinking process is not self. This is something that the Buddha talked about as characteristics of anatta, not self. He said that anything which is truly the self, you should have complete control of it. And he begins with the body, and he says, if this body was truly me, truly mine, I should be master of it, and I should decide, may it be taller, may it be shorter, may it be thinner, may it be fatter, and it would be so. But this cannot be had by mere wishing. And the same with the feelings. You can't just wish yourself to be happy. And we know from meditation that the Sankharas, the thinking process, is not entirely under our control. That we can feel frustrated in the meditation sometimes. Why won't my mind quiet down? It keeps jumping around thinking of this and that. If the mind was self, if the thinking process was self, then it should be just a simple thing to just say, okay, I'm not going to think for the next hour. But it's not a simple thing. And the mental formations can not only cause trouble internally, but they can cause trouble externally. A lot of the difficulties and problems in the world are caused by people's mental formations and the way people relate to each other. One common thing is a projection. When you're dealing with another person, instead of being present with the actual what is said and what is done, you're projecting your own ideas about what their motivations are, what they might really mean, and sometimes these can be right off, and this type of projection onto others of your own mental imagery and formations causes a lot of misunderstanding in the world. Another example that can be particularly pernicious in its effects is attachment to views. People have views and opinions about the way the world is, the way it should be, and so on, and they become attached to those views to a dogmatic degree. This is true, all else is wrong, as the Buddha describes it, and this becomes a source of quarreling and dispute and difficulty in the world. It's important to understand the Buddha didn't say that we should not have views at all, but we should hold them lightly. It's the parable of the two men traveling, and they find a pile of straw, and they bundle up the straw and put it on their heads and carry on their way, and later on they find some cloth, And the one man says, oh, this cloth is more valuable than straw. And he throws the straw away and puts the cloth on his head. And the first man says, I've carried this straw a fair ways already. I'm kind of ashamed to throw it away now. Well, suit yourself. And they carry on, and the story goes on through several more stages. They keep finding more and more valuable things, from firewood sticks all the way up to silver, gold, and finally precious jewels. And the one fellow just readily tosses away whatever he has and picks up the better thing. And the first fellow has now gone further and further with the straw, and he hates to waste all that effort he's put into carrying the straw. So he ends up coming back to his home village with the straw, and the other fellow's got sacks of jewels. And the Buddha specifically identifies this as the issue of attachment to views, like attached to the straw is like being attached to views. But it's an interesting point that can be overlooked, is that he didn't praise someone who comes back to the village with an empty head. He didn't say just toss away everything, toss the jewels away as well. He said, you see something better, pick it up. Don't be attached to your current view. Hold it lightly. So you could say it in in modern language, it's like a working hypothesis. This is the way I think things are, and I'm going to deal with the world in this way. Unless some new information comes to light and shows me that I'm wrong, then I'll change. I won't remain attached to my view. Because a view, even if it's correct, is still, correct in quotation marks, it's still just a view. It's still just a model of reality, whatever reality might be. And unfortunately, due to the limits of our perception and our psyches, all we ever really deal with is models of reality. And we should be remembering that fact and acting accordingly, not being rigidly sure that we have the final answer to anything. So mental formations and Sankharas, you can't say they're a problem in and of themselves. Nothing wrong with mental formations. That's what the mind does. And they're actually not only useful but essential. We couldn't exist. We couldn't function in the world without using mental formations all the time, all day long in different contexts. The point I'm trying to make here is not to give them undue importance or regard them as a real substance. They're not an entity they're just an empty, void process of the mind, conditioned, impermanent, imperfect, all that sankharic baggage, samsaric baggage, all that the imperfections of manifestation and conditionality apply even more so perhaps to Sankharas. Also remember that thoughts about something are not the same as the thing itself. That we're several stages removed from whatever immediate reality is when we get to the stage of thinking about it. Our immediate contact with an object is contact with the senses, which includes the mind sense for purely mental objects. There's a contact with the senses, and then perception identifies that and categorizes it and gives us a simulation of it. And then mental formations only comes in at the end and creates a structure and a theory and an abstraction, gives a story about it. And we need that structure to function, but we have to be careful not to be fooled into seeing that as a reality. As the Zen saying, don't mistake the finger for the moon. It's like the man is pointing out to another man, he's pointing out the moon, and the other fellow focuses on his finger and doesn't perceive the moon. And when you can see the mental formations as empty, this is really the ticket. This is the key, seeing the voidness of the mental formations. When you can really see that, it's very liberating. It's like a burden has been put down. I don't have to carry this heavy weight around with me. This is just an empty fabrication in my mind. I do not have to take it seriously. I'm not obliged to identify with it. I don't have to let it make me suffer.
Anamayam Dhammakataya Sadhu Kalam Dharamase. Sadhu, 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 anumodam.